Hello, and welcome to Central America. We have just gone ahead and finished South America, and we are going to be kind of coming up here. As you remember, Colombia is here as we come on up. We've got Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Belize. I put this right here in alpha order. Well, Yep. I'm thinking LMNOP, yep, alpha order, but we're actually going to be visiting these countries as you would see them traveling up south and heading up to Mexico. This will go through Guatemala and Belize, but not to include Mexico. There will be Mexico and Hawaii and Jamaica in a separate video, integrity video that you have. Let's get started with Panama. Again, as we've come north from Colombia, we're going to hit Panama, and as you remember, very skinny country coming up through starting the southern tip of Central America. Panamanian coffee is wet processed. It is very similar to Costa Rican coffee. It has a sweet, bright balance to it. It's very useful for blenders. So if you end up getting something called a breakfast blend or a blended coffee of any type, it may have Panamanian beans in it. And, more than likely, it's very good coffee that balances out other coffees. And what they're going to be looking at as far as quality is concerned, if you get an estate farmed coffee, which is going to be, as we know already, a higher end type of coffee, more of a microclimate, micro lot type of coffee, it's probably going to be hand picked. And that's going to be what we're going to be seeing in breakfast blends. The rest of Panamanian coffee typically might be put into an espresso to help brighten it up. Remember, espresso beans have a combination usually of Arabica and Robusta beans in there. Anyway, we have a couple of pictures here. Alita Estate coffee right here is one of the best known, highest quality Panamanian coffees that's out there on the market. They're very well respected and very well known. Here is, I don't know if it's one of their employees or if it's one of their family members. More than likely it's a family member, but I'm not quite sure of that. And she is hand-picking beans in the field right there. Taking a look, as you can see, some of these beans are much riper than others. She's hand-picking those ripe beans and leaving the rest of the beans on, waiting for them. They'll go in and do another sweep in several days and waiting for those beans to ripen up, and then several days from that, etc. Harvest is usually about a 10-day period. Alita Coffee actually has the geisha varietal bean. The geisha varietal comes from Geisha, Ethiopia. You'll see that in one of your, as we go over to Ethiopia. And the town of Geisha is without the I. The varietal is with the I, and it's pronounced Geisha varietal. It's grown on the Alita farm in a couple of different areas. Now, Alita it's kind of like Mondavi with wine in the United States. Robert Mondavi has multiple vineyards throughout California. They're not just one vineyard. He doesn't just walk out his back door and voila, there they are kind of thing. He actually has multiple holdings. In addition to that, he actually gets beans or grapes from other farms as well. But that's a whole nother lecture in wine. But the Alita farm here, they grow the geisha varietal in 3 different regions. As you can see, these 3 provinces, Alto Quil, Borqueta, and Chiriquí province, and all 3 of them are actually very well known. Some of these coffees can go for $130 per pound. If you're getting those in green and trying to roast those yourself, obviously you would really probably want to go to an expert that was going to be roasting those coffee beans. I might even try to go to Ben and see if he could help you out with that. I don't know. But most of the beans that are coming in and that you're going to be buying either directly from the farm, which you can do, or from an importer, which is more likely and more common. You know, you would buy those directly from an importer. Those would be, or one of his retailers, one of the retailers out there. Those would be up to $130 per pound. Boqueta is probably the most commonly known one of the three. As you can see here, Alita Estate Coffee, again, very expensive, very well known, very high-end, hand-picked coffee. The geisha varietal here, it's discovered in the 1930s. It was in the mountains around Geisha, Ethiopia. It's extremely high elevation. And it grows very well in an extremely high elevation. That's where it was found, and that's where it thrives very well. One of the interesting kind of little side notes is oftentimes they'll take these varietals, you know, they'll find an indigenous varietal, they'll take it and they'll try to plant it at lower elevations and think, oh, it just doesn't work here. It must be that the terroir in geisha is much better, etc. And the reality of it is that the terroir does make a difference in the type taste of coffee and the final product. But if they just go up the mountainside, and that's what happened with this varietal, if they just went up the mountainside a little bit further, they ended up getting very good coffee from it. And so for a while, the geisha varietal was not doing very well in Panama or South America and Central America, and what they found is that they just went up the mountainside higher than it really would thrive and do very, very well there. Again, they need this varietal needs an extremely high elevation, which adds cost to it. You know, it's going to be harder to pick them. There's going to be less of a yield on it. There's going to be less of an end product for them as well. What geisha is really well known for is this bergamot-like finish. And I think I've got right here a picture of the varietal. As you can see, this bean would not be picked. These ones would. This one would probably maybe be picked at that next go-round a few days from now. Bergamot is a type of sour orange. It looks like a lemon, and you slice it open, and it's got some green in it. It is actually an orange, but it's a sour orange. It's not something commonly that we find in the United States. Maybe you all have had the opportunity to eat something that had like a bergamot finish sauce, or maybe even seen them in the store and purchased them, but it's not a common fruit that you would see here. It is an orange. It is a sour orange. Costa Rica, land of many microclimates. So we've left Panama and we're moving up and we're into Costa Rica now. And so it's a land of many microclimates. And as we know from the term terroir, each microclimate, each area that you go into with different terroir, that coffee is going to have a different flavor and taste to it. So Costa Rican coffees within a range typically vary a lot. Their finest coffees are produced at between 4,000 and 5,000 feet above sea level. No surprise here. We already know that specialty coffee, Arabica beans, are grown at 4,000 and above feet. And this matures slowly in the thin air. So as I mentioned in the last slide, when you go up higher up the mountain, it's harder to pick physically for people to pick those. If you've ever seen any of the Mount Everest films, you know, or documentaries, they often have oxygen strapped on, especially Americans. Sherpas don't, but the Americans will, and they will strap on that oxygen for that last flight up. And it's just a reminder, obviously they're not strapping oxygen on, you know, in Costa Rica, but it's just a reminder, as you go up a mountain, it becomes harder and harder to breathe and thinner. Because the air is thinner. Because of that, it takes a little bit longer to harvest those beans. If you and I went in to harvest them, we wouldn't last very long at all because we're not used to those high altitudes. Again, what this means is more labor, but it also diminishes the yield, and the bean is going to be smaller at this higher altitude. So I've got some Costa Rican plantations, coffee plantations here. You can see these mountains as you go up higher. Beautiful fields, beautiful, beautiful areas here, just gorgeous. Many of you may have gone to Costa Rica on a mission trip or a humanitarian type aid offering, something like that. It's just a gorgeous country, very, very beautiful, and very sweet kind of people, very inviting, hospitable culture as far as what I have experienced. Coffee cultivation began in 1779, so it's fairly relatively late, especially as we take a look at moving into Africa and, different countries as we move into the east or head eastward. The seedlings for Costa Rica actually came from Cuba. It's Costa Rica's most lucrative export. They are the most economically developed country in Central America. So out of all of the countries in Central America, Costa Rica is the most economically developed, and coffee is a major reason for that. They set the standard for coffee quality in Central America and have some of the best coffees in Central America that are available. You can go into many retailers, the grocery store, etc., and see lots of labels for Costa Rican coffee. So you've got to be careful. Take a look and see what you're purchasing, because Costa Rica, just like Hawaii, produces, or anywhere in the world, produces some coffees that are not of high repute, but many that are. So just, again, be discriminating and have a discriminating palate. They grow Arabica varietal exclusively. They do not grow Robusta at all. And here's some pictures, just a reminder of the stages of the coffee bean. This is the flowers that are on the coffee shrubs and or trees, and then this is what those flowers look like as they've matured into a fruit that's ready to pick. Costa Rica has a very high quality wet process. So all of their coffee beans are Arabica. All of their coffee beans are wet processed. The wet processing is a very high quality of wet processing, and they take a lot of care with the processing of their beans. Their main varietal that they have is Caturra. We've seen this before, and just a reminder that, this is a good bean that grows very, very well in South and Central America. We'll see this in other regions as well. Their two main growing regions in Costa Rica are Tres Rios and Tarasu. So two regions that you can see on this map right here. We have multiple other regions. There are a few other ones, but Tres Rios and Tarasu right here. It's not that these four other ones or three other ones are not good. This is San Jose, the capital city, San Jose. But and Nicaragua is going to be up here to the north, and Panama is going to be to the south. But as you can see, these are going to be the two main regions where a specialty high-end coffee come from. So again, knowing your regions within a country can be very predictable as far as whether the coffee is going to be a higher end or not. Here is Tres Rios, some of the fields from Tres Rios. Very beautiful, the cloud cover that you have here, just gorgeous. Tres Rios is considered the Bordeaux of Costa Rica. So I don't know if you know much about wine. Most of you probably have heard, if not all of you have heard of Bordeaux, France. Bordeaux, France is kind of the mothership of wine. Bordeaux, Costa Rica is, Tres Rios in Costa Rica is kind of their mothership within Costa Rica. It's just the highest, finest quality with the best expression of soil, which is what Bordeaux, France is in, as far as the wine areas. And even when you go to other wine regions within France, even those regions will say, all of them will say, we're the second best to Bordeaux, So in Costa Rica, it's very similar. It's kind of like, oh, our coffee's wonderful, it's tremendous, but they all kind of bow down a bit to the Bordeaux region of Costa Rica, which is considered, which is truly named Tres Rios. The Irazu volcano is there, and one of the things that's very cool, this is a picture of it right here, is the proximity that the coffee plantations actually have to the volcano, and because of that, the land is heated very thoroughly and very well. Even at night, it's kept very warm because of the proximity to the Irazu volcano. This is a small coffee growing region. It's not large, and so coffee there is going to be expensive. The Tarazu is basically, if you get this, it's going to be, you can see this is a Starbucks coffee label right here. Costa Rica terrazzo. So when you see that next time you're in Starbucks or in the store or wherever, you can go, all right, that's Costa Rican coffee. It's from the terrazzo, which is one of the best regions, coffee growing of Costa Rica. If you get this coffee and you taste it, there's going to be a burst of citrus followed by some notes of brown sugar. And, you know, I've talked before about how marketers come in, and whether it's coffee or wine or tea, they kind of give you a little bit of a song and dance. But this is very, very true. This is very true to home as to what a terrazzo is going to be. Next time you get one or have the opportunity to taste one, taste it without cream and sugar. See if you can get that burst of citrus followed by the notes of brown sugar. And then if you want to add cream and sugar or cream or sugar, go ahead and do that. This is designated as strictly hard beans, so SHB. They have on the label, you'll see it'll say SHB. So in terrazzo, they designate their coffees as SHB, strictly hard bean, in the terrazzo region. It's, again, Costa Rica's highest grade. If you see SHB, all that comes from terrazzo and all that comes from Tres Rios is going to be SHB, that's strictly hard bean, highest quality of Costa Rican coffee. Right here, you can see this. This right here would denote, one would think, potentially a higher quality of coffee. Cabin Creek Roasters is a roaster here in the United States. They get their coffee in and roast. It's kind of a larger operation than Ben is at Lucky Goat, and they're very well known throughout the United States. If you ever have an opportunity to buy a Cabin Creek coffee, I'd suggest it. You can order online directly from them. Again, you can see Costa Rica SHB Estate Terrazzo. Cabin Creek Roasters is based out of Virginia. They have 8 or 9 coffee shops around the Virginia area, greater Virginia area, and they also, you can buy direct from them. So you can order online and buy direct from them. You can go to one of their coffee shops. It is going to be a very different experience, obviously, from going to either a Starbucks, which is kind of on the opposite end, or a Lucky Goat. You know, it's kind of maybe Lucky Goat in 15 years, maybe, you know, when Lucky Goat has, if Ben has any ideas or desires to branch out with his retail shop, it would be kind of like that. They've got all kinds of neat things there if you have a chance to go in Virginia. Let's move on to Nicaragua. Coffee came in the mid 1800s. So we've got here with Costa Rica 1779, and then in Nicaragua the mid 1800s. So you can see it kind of took a bit of time to move up. And just a reminder of our map and where we are. We have Colombia here. We're going through Panama. We hit Costa Rica. We're headed to Nicaragua, and we'll see El Salvador and Honduras, Guatemala, and Belize at the end of our lecture today. Here are some pictures from some Guatemalan farmers right here. They actually, you know, bring their children to the fields often, especially during harvest. Children help out. Americans may think that's cruel and inhumane, but it's very much a part of their economy and what they do. And, you know, it's not like they don't have their children in school. They just pull them out to help during harvest. When they're younger, that's very frequent, and we've seen pictures of it, to see children on, you know, on the backs of males and females as they work the fields and tend the fields. So they just take them to work with them. It's kind of like we have take your child to work day, and they just have it pretty much, you know, on a more regular basis throughout the year. In Nicaragua, coffee, as in all Central America, not all, but many Central American countries, plays a significant role in the economy and in the environment as well. They have a very rich volcanic soil. Their climate is a tropical, humid, kind of a tropical forest, very humid type of climate. So we think it's humid in Tallahassee during the summer, maybe year-round. It is in Nicaragua, and that those humidity levels can get very high in those tropical forest areas. 95% of their farms in Nicaragua are micro and small-scale producers. They have very, very few large farms. So what we would see in the United States with the large corn farms, for instance, not seen so much at all in Nicaragua. They have, again, small-scale producers, small farms, microclimate farms. The farms may blend versus keep their beans separate. They may be blended, but those are going to go ahead and be, picked on somebody's individual farm, or maybe, small, very, very small farm that they have there. There are several regions in Nicaragua. The first one, Segovia. If you're going to be drinking this coffee, you're going to be looking at floral aromas, distinct flavor, and bright acidity. One of the things about this coffee region is that it basically doesn't have any high notes and any low notes. That doesn't mean it's a dull coffee by any stretch of the imagination. But it's got medium acidity, it says bright here, but, it is a bright acidity, but as far as, low acidity versus high acidity, it's going to be in the mid-range. Intensity is going to be in the mid-range. Again, it does have floral aromas and a distinct flavor, but it's not going to be really, really low notes, and it's not going to be really, really high notes. It's going to be, everything's pretty much going to be within what we are talking about here, floral aromas, distinct flavor, and a bright acidity. It's all going to be kind of in the mid-range. It's not going to burst and wake up your palate. It's not going to be dull and boring by any imagination either as well. This region actually borders Honduras, and it is really a very respectable, very nice coffee, and there's some really good, respectable coffees out there that are from this region. The other two regions right here, Matalapa and Jinotera regions, these two regions right here are close to some mountain ranges, and they are very well known as well. So these would be the three regions within Nicaragua that I would take a look at drinking coffee from, the best of what Nicaragua has. Also, these coffees are very well known as fair trade and or organic regions for Nicaragua for coffee to come from. Let's take a look at Nicaragua's single varietals here. If you're going to be taking a look at what kind of coffee varietal, it may be a blending of these three, or it may be one or another, or blending of two of them. We've talked about Caturra already. As you can see, these beans have been roasted right here. This next one is Posh. Posh comes from, it's a French word, and I guess the French named this bean. I don't know a whole lot about the story behind that. But Caturra, Posh, and then the last one is Maragoshipi. Basically, Nicaraguan coffees, again, well-balanced, lower tone, acidity. With these single varietals that you have here, you're going to have a heavier-bodied Nicaraguan coffee, but it's not, again, you need to remember and keep everything in the context that the western side of the world with North America, Mexico, Central America, South America, when we say heavier bodies, I mean within the category of an American coffee versus going over to Africa and especially Indonesia as you get heavier. So within, if you're looking at drinking coffees for the first time, you want to start out with a South or Central American coffee. I strongly suggest that. Maybe go with a lighter body. As you start getting a little bit more adept with your palate, you can go into a Nicaraguan coffee because they're going to be a little bit heavier bodied. Maybe you taste a lighter bodied South American coffee and you go, I wish it had a little bit more body. And remember, body is, we can think of body like we do with milk. So we have skim milk and 1% and 2% whole milk, half and half, and heavy cream. And as you drink those, the body of them becomes heavier on your palate. So that's kind of, it's like the discernment between, skim milk versus whole milk. But anyway, these, again, within the Americas, Nicaraguan coffee from these single varietals are going to actually be a heavier bodied type of coffee. Compare it to an African coffee, not so heavy bodied. It'll be much lighter bodied than an African coffee. Let's move on to Honduras. Basically, quality in Honduras spans a huge range. These are considered Colombian substitutes. So oftentimes when they need a cheaper type of coffee to blend in, they'll blend in a Honduras coffee. It's a kind of a lower grade of Colombian coffees typically. speaking. Again, this quality range is a huge range, so I'm talking about mid to lower range Honduras coffees when I'm generalizing with this. So it's kind of like Kleenex. If you get a tissue, and some of them are kind of cheap, maybe you bought them at the dollar store or whatever, and they're very, very thin, versus an actual Kleenex. It's the kind of lower dollar store kind of number, and it's nothing against Honduras or anything like that. They do have some very good, very respectable coffees. I'm generalizing with the amounts that they produce. Most Honduras coffees are blended or used as a blend within another coffee. It is the second largest producer of coffees in Central America, so there are a lot of Honduran coffees out there. Again, this quality is a huge span within Honduras. They have some extremely respectable coffees. Do not shy away from Honduras coffees. Just make sure that you don't buy a cheap Honduras coffee, because it's probably not going to be very good. And as we look at blended coffees throughout the world, what they're serving in a retail setting, much of what you might get in a lower grade coffee might have a Honduras blend in it because it's going to be cheaper to produce that coffee. Actually, Honduras employs 22% of their people in the rural environment through coffee. So it's a big employer in rural areas, the coffee industry is. One of the things that was very interesting was Hurricane Mitch. Hurricane Mitch destroyed much of the infrastructure within Honduras, leaving most of the 1998 crop unharvested for coffee. So if we take a look here, I think we can get a better perspective. This picture here, the devastation that Hurricane Mitch, when it blew through Honduras, and as we look at those Caribbean and Pacific countries, I mean, they can get hit from both ends, and as a hurricane comes through, it can easily blow through these Central American countries because of the landmass not being so large. By the time they come through, if you're looking at something hitting maybe even Panama City and coming through, by the time it hits Atlanta, it's kind of dissipated, may cause some damage, but as it moves northward, a hurricane that hits us is not going to be so devastating because the land will slow it down. There's not that much land for them to move through when a hurricane hits through a central, some at least Central American countries. So 1998, Hurricane Mitch came through and it destroyed this. Well, you can imagine they were fighting for water and, survival, and, there was lots of aid that came to their rescue, etc. Don't get me wrong. But the last thing they were probably thinking about is, oh, let's go harvest those coffee beans, and, how can we get them to market? Even if they've been up there harvesting the beans, trying to get them, processed and into market and then exported would have been just extremely difficult. Very little coffee came through and was exported. What was obviously went up in cost because of supply and demand. But again, that hurricane left the infrastructure of Honduras devastated, and they couldn't get their coffee crop out and processed and exported. So it really hurt the economy. And I bring this up because many of these, countries and all of these areas and regions are dependent upon them getting their crop to market. If it doesn't get to market, they don't eat that year. So it was really, really hard and very, very devastating in Honduras. And one of the large scale tasks was to get that infrastructure back in place so that they could, for the following year, get their beans out. Aromas for Honduras coffees are white pepper and dry grasses, notes of cocoa, medium acidity, and a long, smooth finish. So this might be something that's, appealing to you. Try a high-end Honduras coffee. This is a company here called Full Circle that actually they ship directly, and so you could buy directly from them if you wanted to. These again are some men from Honduras. They are in the fields looking agriculturally at what's going on with the crops, etc. Back to this picture here, you can see this is a French press. French press is a very well-known way to make coffee. We haven't talked a lot about different making of different coffees, but this is one way that you can use. Take your grounds and you heat your water to about 195 to 205 degrees, and you pour it through, and you slowly push this down, and the coffee, comes out the top, and the beans are down at the bottom, or the grinds are down at the bottom. A lot of people really, really like their coffee this way, and it's a different finish than if I, made it in a Mr. Coffee. Doesn't mean it's better. It's just a different finish to it. Let's move on. I know we're moving quickly, but let's move on to Guatemala. They have a wide range of climates there as well, which is surprising. We kind of think of lumping together Central America, but there are a lot of diverse microclimates within Guatemala. It results in 8 different growing regions. I'm not going to ask you to memorize all 8 of those growing regions, but there are 8 specific growing regions, and they divide these up when they label so that you get an idea of what you're purchasing, especially if you're buying a specialty Arabica coffee. Each region has a distinctive flavor, and it's kind of odd. You're kind of going, well, aren't all coffees from that area? They all seem kind of the same, etc. If you had a cupping and you had all 8 of them side by side, you go, oh my goodness, so, the light would go off. So if you ever have an opportunity to taste some coffee side by side and do a cupping, I'd strongly suggest doing that. Again, cupping without cream and sugar first. If you want to go back and put it in, then, have at it. Again, each region has a very distinctive profile. So Antigua right here is full-bodied, a wet, complex, well-balanced, characteristically clean, and considered our classic bittersweet dark chocolate taste. Now, some of this, again, going back to marketing, is kind of like, how can we put this in terms that people will buy it? But there is a lot of truth to this as well. So I can basically think, okay, if I want a bittersweet chocolate taste, let me find a Guatemalan Antigua coffee. Here we have a gentleman here, and he's drawing, doing a drawing on the mats of these beans. Antigua genuinely is costly. If you get a genuine Antigua, it's going to be very costly coffee from Guatemala. So the fact that it's from Central America, again, when we talk about Central American coffees, a lot of what I'm talking about is generalization. There are some very, very great coffees. If you get a genuine Antigua that's not blended and 100%, it's going to be extremely costly coffee for you. The quality will vary per harvest. It kind of reminds me of wine. So if this year's harvest is going to taste different than next year's harvest. So that's kind of a cool thing from year to year to taste these Guatemalan Antiguas as they come out. Their elevation is over 5,000 feet. So we already know that these are going to be high-end coffees. Again, it's 46 to 5,600 feet, and it's close to 5,000 feet on this. And so they're going to be very high-end, very hard to pick. As we remember, too, there's going to be less beans per tree. The yield is going to be lower, and then the beans are going to be smaller. So that, again, increases the cost. The labor to pick up at these high elevations is going to be more expensive as well. The varietals that they have there are 2 of them, the Bourbon and the Typica. We've talked about those before as well. In Antigua, this is an interesting region because the valley is surrounded by 3 volcanoes. So that volcanic soil, the heat from the volcano is going to make for very, very good coffee. The last country that we're going to be looking at is Belize. It's actually kind of an interesting country. It doesn't grow a lot of coffee, but I do want to talk about it. It is Central America, and they do have coffee that's produced there. Belize lacks the high mountains that some of these other Central and South American countries have. However, they've been very smart. They have coffee tourism. You can go in. This actually is a coffee plantation that's right here. But it's a resort as well. Number one, it's a resort. You can go in and you can stay there, and you can do a lot of tourist activities, specifically athletically. You can do a lot of adventure types things with hiking, and you can hike through. They have behind them an actual coffee plantation, and you can hike through the plantation. They actually pick the beans and serve the coffee there. They roast it, etc. This resort does not, tout high-end coffee, but a lot of Americans specifically, and Europeans as well, really like to integrate in with what they're doing in a vacation. Gone are the days of sitting on the deck of the cruise ship and, you know, catching sun. People want to do bungee jumping and, you know, hang gliding and, you know, canyoning and all that kind of stuff. And so Belize has been very smart about this coffee tourism. They have lodges in Mountain Pine Ridge. That's where this one is here. You can see Belize, the country of Belize, and kind of how it fits in. It's south of Mexico and it's east of Guatemala. It's a little boat ride to Honduras there. And again, these have started coffee plantings to supply only their guests at these little small, you know, ecotourism or, ecotourism, coffee tourism places. In Belize, there's only one commercial estate, so there's only one estate that you can go to, and they actually serve coffee there. I mean, I'm sorry, I have gone back to the last slide right here where these tourism resort areas are serving only coffee to their guests. But however, in Belize, they do have one commercial estate where they actually sell and export coffee. And it's called Gallon Jug Estate. Not very frou-frou-y name, you know, or anything like that. It's kind of pretty, reminds me of Jimmy Buffett. I don't know why, but it kind of a little bit more island fun kind of name. It's nestled deep in the Belizean Mayan rainforest. And so basically it's this is some coffee as it is packaged. Again, 100% Arabica coffee from Belize, Gallon Jug Estate. Here's a larger packet of the coffee right here. It's not super expensive. It's kind of one of those fun kinds of coffees that you can taste right there if you're interested. Kind of a niche for sure. So if you're you know, headed down to Central America, please see some coffee plantations. It's a great way to connect with the culture and with the environment and to see coffee in its, you know, in-ground state, kind of, so to speak, no pun intended. And it's a very sweet, welcoming kind area to go into. Coffee tourism, coffee sales, etc., employ a lot of people. It's a great way to help stimulate the coffee economy or the economy within these countries as well. Have a great week and go Noles.